From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Kansans are lining up to cast their votes already, most drawn by one issue in particular, a constitutional amendment on abortion. The fight over that amendment bringing millions of dollars pouring into the state and raising lots of questions about what the wording means, what the impact will be, and what some campaigners can and can't do. We'll work to clear up the misconceptions as we answer your questions today on Kansas Week. The abortion amendment has raised tempers, led to headlines across the country, and left many Kansans scratching their heads in confusion. This is Kansas Week, and I'm your host, Pilar Pedraza. We're hoping this special single-topic episode will help clear up the fog around this issue. Our goal here is to bring you the facts, not to advocate for or against the amendment itself. Now, a quick note. Originally, the idea had been to have a panel of all women today. Unfortunately, that didn't work out, but we're going to move ahead with the topic anyway, diving straight in with Cake's Deb Ferris, who has a look at the wording of the proposed amendment and what a yes and a no vote mean legally.
You've seen the ads and the signs just about everywhere, but what do you need to know before heading to the polls on Tuesday? Do you vote yes on the abortion amendment or no? Kansas law currently allows abortions up to 22 weeks of pregnancy. It's protected by a state Supreme Court ruling from 2019 that says the state Bill of Rights protects a woman's right to decide whether to continue a pregnancy.
If this amendment passes, then there will be explicit language in the Kansas Constitution saying nothing in the Constitution, the state Constitution, can be interpreted as providing a guarantee of abortion services.
Friends University political science professor Dr. Russell Arbin Fox says it would then be up to the state legislature to basically start over writing abortion laws.
You would no longer be able to use the state Constitution's guarantees of basic rights to protect abortion from being restricted or even outright banned.
Wichita State political science professor Dr. Neil Allen says because the Kansas legislature is predominantly Republican, if the amendment passes, that would likely mean big changes.
The amendment would reverse that and give the legislature and the governor full reign to make changes to our laws.
If voters say no to the amendment, Allen says nothing will change in Kansas in terms of abortion rights.
A no vote keeps the status quo where the state Supreme Court is protecting the right of women to access abortion services.
And joining me to break this all down for you this week, we have Jackson Overstreet, one of my counterparts at Cake News, our secondary political reporter, and Dr. Jay Steinmetz, a political analyst from Fort Hays State University. Plus, joining us by Zoom, Tim Carpenter from the Kansas Reflector. Thank you to all three for joining us. I want to start with you, Tim, since we've got you up. You and I have covered multiple amendments, and I'm still getting people who are very confused about what a yes vote and a no vote mean, flipping the meanings of them. Is this something inherent in the way that constitutional amendments seem to be written in Kansas?
Well, sometimes those ballot measures have gobbledygook and government speak, and it's a shame that there isn't some sort of independent board or commission that could write plain English. Maybe they need a couple of journalists to take a look at their amendments. But it has caused some confusion among some people.
Yeah, and I know we're still getting a lot of questions from viewers about that, Jackson. Even we ran some of these stories over at Cake News, and we had some folks calling into the station afterwards with some very unusual misconceptions. One person thought that if we didn't vote for this, then we would have the same issue as another state where she believed that people could kill a child up to 20 days after birth. And these are some of the stories that we're hearing where people are completely misunderstanding what's going on.
It really is kind of remarkable. You're seeing it with the ads, with a lot of what's going on, that people understand it if you read it. I mean, we talk about all the time in the newsroom just how to word this about what this does because it's so particular. But it is incredibly confusing, and if it takes us, who have been steeped in this thing for months now, and we're still trying to figure it out, the average viewer and the average voter is going to have a really hard time with it.
Yeah. Not something that unusual, really.
No, I mean, amendments are often written in this way. The politics is sort of baked in. There's a lot of sort of leverage points that go on in politics, and unfortunately for the average voter, that means a lot less clarity. So there's ambiguity. It's also true that this is kind of a microcosm of our political era of misinformation and disinformation. It's harder for your average citizen to find information about what this amendment is. I get the sense from talking to a lot of people here in Kansas that they know it's important, but they're not quite sure of, especially the consequence of a yes vote winning or a no vote winning.
Yeah. And we know there's been at least one poll from Coefficient as publicized by 528.com. 528, 538? Thank you. I'm always getting those numbers wrong. I'm not a mathematician, I'm a journalist. But we know from those numbers that this is a really close race right now. How much do you think that tightness plays into people's confusion, or vice versa?
I think it does. I mean, I think it's an opportunity here for both sides of the debate to try to find the margins that will pull them over the victory line. And that means that there's going to be even more misinformation and disinformation out there. There's going to be we've seen a very aggressive outreach on both sides of the campaign to try to push this amendment through. Again, most people know this is going to be very impactful. This is an important amendment. This is an important time in Kansas politics. So which side is going to find those leverage points? We'll often see that in the information sphere, on the internet, and how they reach the voters.
All right. Well, we know there's a lot of misunderstanding, and there are as many questions about this amendment as there are Kansans, it seems. We certainly see certain questions repeated over and over again. Cake's David Scott found some answers for you.
Dr. Russell Arbin Fox with Friends University says a victory for the no vote will not necessarily mean a free-for-all for abortion in Kansas. He says polls have shown Kansans like the current limits in place.
Any of those restrictions could be challenged. But the fact that, they haven't been challenged lends credence to the people who say, you know what, right now we actually have something that most Kansans are in agreement with.
WSU's Dr. Neil Allen says a defeat for the Value Them Both amendment also wouldn't mean taxpayers would start paying for abortions.
The Kansas state government does not currently fund abortion services. That is a policy position that would be very unpopular in the state of Kansas. There is no foreseeable situation where our legislature would create a funding source for abortion.
And Fort Hays State's Jay Steinmetz says don't expect abortion on demand anytime soon either.
There are various different regulations and restrictions regarding the medical procedure, as there are with all medical procedures from one degree or another. The regulations or the restrictions that exist here in the state of Kansas, basically a 24-hour wait period.
But what if vote yes passes? Will it necessarily mean an all-out abortion ban in Kansas? No exclusions for rape or incest? Our experts have their doubts, saying Republicans would worry about upsetting their supporters.
Some of those Republicans saying, you know what, if I go hardcore in support of a total ban, I am going to lose some of the Republican votes that I need to stay in office.
Jay Steinmetz says those concerns could make it tough to override a Governor Kelly veto of an all-out ban, assuming Kelly wins re-election.
If, however, the Kansas legislature tries to go a different track, which is, bringing out the 2015 and 2011 legislation again, restricting abortion, making its access more difficult, but effectively not outright banning it or having a lot more exceptions to it, then it becomes a possibility of Governor Kelly veto becoming less successful.
And really can't say that there's much of a surprise. These are some of the most common misconceptions. It really seems like on both sides of this issue, some of those misconceptions have been promulgated by the proponents and opponents.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that. I mean, the idea that we have taxpayer funding for abortion is not the case. I've certainly seen that messaging out there. The idea that we have something like abortion on demand, where in reality, every state has restrictions and regulations regarding the medical procedure. I'm not surprised to see those kinds of things. Again, it's kind of a microcosm of the political era that we live in.
Yeah.
We are seeing a lot of this in these ads. I know listening to some radio stations with a photographer today, there are ads playing all over that are just talking about, this is some sort of ploy to have unlimited abortion in Kansas if you vote no. And that's just simply not the case. That would be incredibly unpopular in the state. And it's just really, it's a lot of people trying to campaign and win over their voters, and so they're resorting to tactics that not necessarily the best. They're a little more underhanded, and they're just trying to get that fear vote, because fear drives a lot more voters to the poll than hope and change does in a lot of ways.
Yeah, from the vote no because there will be a ban to the vote yes because it'll mean unlimited abortions. Tim, these are things that we've heard from both sides, and it really does seem to be kind of pushing that fear vote.
Yeah, so I think unfortunately both sides of the campaign on the amendment have decided that if they nudge a little bit across the line or far across the line, they might prevail. And so I don't think they're self-restrained enough, but I agree that the motivation is to win. And one way you do that is you stoke fear among the public about what could happen. And what could happen is we don't know. The politics of the future are unknown, but I think the things that are most circulating in the ether are a potential ban on abortion, an opening the gate to abortions after 22 weeks, late-term abortions, and public funding, and these kind of things. It's just a lot of scare tactics, but we don't know exactly where the Kansas political system is going on this. But that just adds to the consequence of the vote on Tuesday.
And as you mentioned, Tim, a lot of scare tactics, that desperation to get those votes. And that's also bringing a lot of money rolling into Kansas, some might say by the truckload, to fund the fight over abortion rights. Most of those out-of-state funds going to support the opposition to the amendment. Meanwhile, Catholic churches across the state are footing the majority of the bill for groups fighting for the amendment. First off, these numbers show us the Vote No campaign is outraising the Vote Yes campaign, and most of the Vote Yes money is coming from Catholic churches across Kansas. The leading Vote No group, Kansans for Constitutional Freedom, reported raising more than $6.5 million. Organizers say nearly 5,000 Kansans from 80 different counties donated about $500,000 to the campaign as well. But the majority of the money has come from out of state, with the 1630 fund making the most significant donation of almost $1.4 million to the Vote No campaign. Meanwhile, the Value Them Both Association, which is leading the Vote Yes push, reported raising nearly $4.7 million, more than half of that coming from just one source, the Kansas City, Kansas Catholic Diocese, which donated $2.5 million alone. The Wichita Diocese was the next biggest donor with more than $500,000, and the Salina Diocese, Kansas Catholic Conference, and a couple of other churches made more six-figure donations. Political analyst Dr. Michael Smith from Emporia State says it's not just how much each side has to spend, but when they spend it that matters.
From a political organizing standpoint, this is really a test. You just mentioned they've got another $2 million and they're still raising money. Can a late push turn things around for them? And we'll see.
Meanwhile, the Value Them Both Association says it has numbers showing just how widespread the grassroots push is for this amendment across the state of Kansas. Kansans for Life, Kansas Family Voice, and the Kansas Catholic Conference have joined forces for the campaign to pass the proposed amendment. They say they've organized over 800 presentations on the issue in churches and community organization meetings across the state. In addition, they say they've distributed more than 100,000 yard signs and knocked on more than 275,000 doors. Between the three groups, they say they've got more than 1,200 volunteers working to get the word out. As for those fundraising numbers, the association says 99% of its dollars come from Kansas-based donors. And I don't know about you guys, but whether it's my text message inbox, my email inbox, my snail mail inbox, they are all overflowing right now with these ads.
And it's going to keep up. I know another reporter at Cake, John Hayes, he did a story yesterday talking about this last push that we're going to see over the next couple of days. Because I know here, at least in Central County, we've got extended voting locations today, tomorrow, and then there's one last little half day of voting on Monday. It's going to keep up. These radio ads, television ads, everything, because you just saw the numbers there. This is the first state to have a vote like this after Roe v. Wade was overturned. And so all the attention on it, which means you have all this money and you're just going to have this constant big push coming through here in the next couple days.
Yeah.
And a bit of good news, actually. We've been talking a lot negatively a lot about this, but the positive side of this is that we're seeing robust democracy at work. We're seeing engaged citizens. We're seeing people getting out there, voices being heard, and that's a good thing. The plus here is that we're going to probably have a pretty high turnout for a primary campaign. We've got a lot of people who are engaged in the political system. That's a good thing.
Yeah, talking about that engagement and the expected turnout, Tim, I know you've been kind of looking into that as we were coming up to recording this show, but we're looking at possible record numbers here.
So Scott Schwab, who's the Secretary of State, he put out his estimate today of the turnout for this primary. He's suggesting it could be 36%, which would be better than 2020. And far, far better than 2018, the last midterm election. And I think it's a consequence of the constitutional amendment. He also pointed to competitive primaries, including his own Republican primary. But I think the turnout speaks to the fact that Kansans view this issue with great care. I did want to touch back to your church question about the nonprofits participating. Churches can engage in advocacy on these constitutional questions. They're going to have to pull all those church yard signs in churches on election day. But as somebody who kind of has some, I'm cautious about erosion of the separation of church and state. I really kind of wonder where the Catholic dioceses are taking us on this.
Yeah. And certainly one of the questions we're going to tackle a little bit later there, Tim, whether the amendment passes or not, it's going to change the political landscape in Kansas for the long term. And Cake's Jackson Overstreet took a look at that example.
Access to abortion may be the most heated topic nationwide in America, and that's no different in Kansas. Kansans are headed to the poll to vote on the Value Them Both amendment on August 2nd, potentially changing the state's constitutional protections of the procedure. Two people that will be watching those results incredibly close are Governor Laura Kelly and Attorney General Derek Schmidt.
Depending on if it passes or not, and depending on how much it passes by, you could see some dramatic changes in how people in the legislature and how the governor runs for re-election.
Now, so far, both candidates for governor have stayed relatively quiet on Value Them Both.
They've really effectively kind of avoided it, both sides, and they're kind of sidestepping it and just letting the voters deal with the referendum.
That might not last for long. Political experts say a close win for yes could actually help Kelly stay in office.
Governor Kelly is probably still an underdog, but standing as a defender of women's bodily autonomy and ability to make their own decisions is right now, I think, a pretty good position for Kelly to be in.
It's a double-edged sword. A yes win could also benefit Schmidt's effort to unseat her.
The anti-abortion side will want to elect Attorney General Schmidt as governor and more anti-abortion state legislators.
That's only if yes wins by a close margin. If it's a blowout,
if it passes by 65, 70%, then Kelly is probably going to say, okay, let's just leave this issue aside.
Or if no wins,
that's going to completely upset the apple cart. If it's defeated, you have had a Republican Party that has pushed for this since early 2020. And now all of a sudden, one of their major issues is I guess that went away.
And I know that was Jackson's story, but I actually want to talk to Tim first. You and I, again, both been covering Kansas politics for a while now. And this would not necessarily be the first time that the debate over abortion has kind of changed the direction of Kansas politics. We saw something similar back in the 90s with the Summer of Mercy.
Yeah, so abortion politics has been at the forefront in Kansas for a quarter of a century. And every year in the legislature, there's an abortion bill or 10. And I think this vote, no matter what happens on Tuesday, it signals the culture war in Kansas is far from over. And I also think that when we look at this, we can see sort of a rural-urban dynamic in terms of this. If you drive around rural Kansas, you're going to see a lot of vote no signs. In some of the urban centers, you'll see clusters of, the other way around. You'll see in rural areas, people saying vote yes, and in urban centers, you might see them signs saying vote no. But I think in the end, the power of Johnson County as a voting bloc is going to be well demonstrated here.
And that is something very interesting. We've definitely seen that in the governor's race over the last couple of years.
Absolutely, and you see a lot with this amendment. I think it really is going to form the Republican side more than the Democrats, because you have a lot of Democrats who are going to be, we support no, all that stuff like that. But in talking to a lot of these political experts we did for that special, simply not every Republican is anti-abortion, or they're different shades of it. And so you have to know maybe Wichita, Johnson County, Kansas City area Republicans are going to be much more, just keep things how they are, even if yes wins, whereas you have kind of more out in the rural area, it's going to be pushing for maybe that full ban or at least some more restrictions. And so that really, if it is a close yes win, but Governor Kelly gets her spot back, then that puts a lot of moderate Republicans in a very interesting position come 2023.
And that's kind of the story of Kansas politics, really, where the moderates kind of decide what happens, whether they swing right with the conservatives or they swing left with the centrist Democrats in the state.
Yeah, that's true for a lot of states, but here's the problem for the Republican Party. The suburban voters are moving away from the Republican Party, and the trends are not looking good. The Republican Party has a woman voter problem, and they have currently a suburban voter problem. It wasn't that long ago, maybe a decade or so, where the Republican Party did much better in the suburbs than they're doing right now. We see this across the country. Suburbs of Indianapolis, suburbs of Kansas City, all across the country, we see this problem. So how the Republicans win back those voters is going to be key to their long-term viability. And the abortion issue, and this being at the forefront of politics right now, frankly doesn't help that. You've got a lot of pro-choice Republican voters in the suburban areas. Polling has been pretty consistent on the abortion issue, and it's roughly about 60% support some kind of option, medical procedure of abortion. So effectively a pro-choice position, roughly 60%. That obviously does not map over the political parties. You've got a pretty healthy section of moderate Republicans, in particular women Republicans, who are pro-choice. So this issue is going to, it's a challenge for the Republican Party moving forward, and how they adapt to the demographic issue and the policy issue.
All right. Well, one policy we know of, churches and the legality of being among the biggest financial backers of this debate, not to mention all of those who have been putting out their own signs, raising the question, isn't that illegal? Cake's Maeve Ashbrook found the answer for us.
Drive through Wichita, you've probably seen vote yes or vote no signs in front of churches. Viewers and people on social media are wondering, is this legal because of their tax-exempt status?
Yes, it is.
Churches are 501c3s, which means they don't pay taxes. So the IRS says they cannot participate or intervene in campaigns for political candidates. But this proposed amendment to the state constitution is different.
You see a lot of churches that will run right up to endorsing explicitly a candidate, and they'll just stop a couple of inches short of that, and that's okay.
Churches can also host candidates and
helping people get registered to vote, helping people get to polling stations.
As long as it's not endorsing or funding a candidate, it's okay, including these vote yes and vote no signs. Political science professor Dr. Russell Arbin Fox says Wichita is no stranger to churches taking a stance, like when the city passed its non-discrimination ordinance.
There were churches that, were making it very clear that they supported the NDO. They were providing buses to help people get down to City Hall to give testimony.
We've also seen an online form through the IRS where you can report a church for violating its tax-exempt status circulating on social media. It's legit, but when it comes down to these signs, Fox says don't bother.
There have been churches that have endorsed candidates that have lost their tax-exempt status. However, it's not a slam dunk.
In Wichita, Maeve Ashbrook, Cake News on your side.
And as Dr. Fox mentioned there at the end, churches seem to get a lot of leeway on issues like this.
Yeah, they do. They can go right up to the line. I mean, a church can say something like, let's make America great again. You kind of have an idea of what sort of political message or what candidate they may be gesturing toward, but they're largely protected in doing so. The distinction between a candidate and a policy issue as regards to, tax-exempt status is the law. It may not make a lot of sense, but it is the law.
All right.
And I think one of the most interesting things that has been talked about with this is that in Kansas, so many polling places are churches. And so how far they have to have signs on election day, things like that, because that's really the best way for them to get the last minute voter, because If it's a vote yes church, they're not going to put vote no signs out there as well. And so it really is kind of a one-sided playing field. When you have all these different polling places, you're going to have, that's probably going to be the last best exposure any voter has that's still undecided before they go in the ballot box.
Yeah, an interesting point there. Now, the debate isn't just a Kansas one, no matter it's a big one here, but with the U.S. Supreme Court's overturning of Roe v. Wade last month, it became a national issue. We're just the first to vote on it, drawing national attention to the state.
ABC, Good Morning America. You're going to have 60 Minutes, from CBS. You got people from the New York Times. You got people from the Washington Post. This is a major story that's attracting a major attention.
Political analyst Dr. Russell Arbin Fox at Friends University was one of the people ABC network correspondents interviewed Sunday about the abortion amendment Republicans have titled Value Them Both. Fox says this attention is really no surprise, considering how much attention Kansans are giving the vote themselves. Fox says that's not only because this is the first vote on abortion in the country since the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade, but also because for the first time, conservative lawmakers could be able to put their anti-abortion stances into state law if voters give the amendment the go-ahead.
I've seen higher levels of activism than I can remember ever seeing for an August primary vote. I have also seen some just really intriguing signals.
The ABC crews also tagged along with Sedgwick County Commissioner Lacey Cruz Sunday as she went door to door talking to voters about the amendment.
It really just shines a light on how very important this vote is August 2nd and how many people are really paying attention to it.
You can take a look at the demonstrations. You can take a look at the signs. You can take a look at how it's coming up in conversations.
And Tim, I know all you have to do is Google Kansas abortion amendment and you get articles from all over the country right now.
That's right. Kansas is known for something. We're not the flyover state anymore. It's about abortion politics. I do think that Roe v. Wade decision just massively energized this issue, both in terms of fundraising and maybe people willing to go out and walk the streets and knock on doors and to get to go vote. So the timing of Roe v. Wade and the U.S. Supreme Court decision, I think, played into this Kansas political drama.
Yes, very much so. Thank you so much to all of our guests. As we leave you tonight, a reminder that early voting is already open. You'll need to check with your county's election office for times and locations. And all those unaffiliated voters who aren't members of a particular party, you can still vote on the amendment. It'll just be the only thing on your ballot. Thanks so much for joining us, and we hope you have a great week.